Charles Chaplin made limelight at the most troubled period of his career. In the late 1940s, America's Cold War paranoia reached its peak, and Chaplin, as a foreigner with liberal and humanist sympathies, was a prime target for political witch hunters. It didn't help that he had recently been cited in an unseemly paternity suit. Attacked as he was by the right-wing press and reactionary institutions like the American Legion, it seemed that America had turned against the man it had once idolized. Not surprisingly then, in choosing his next subject, he deliberately sought escape from disagreeable contemporary reality. He found it in bittersweet nostalgia for the world of his youth, the world of the London music halls at the opening of the 20th century, where he had first discovered his own genius as an entertainer. His story concerns a once famous comedian who has lost the ability to command his audience. Chaplin said that he based the character on real-life stage personalities whom he had seen lose their gifts and their public, like the clown Marceline, with whom he had worked as a boy. Clearly, though, he was also thinking of his own present bitter experience of a faithless public. The story, as the opening title says, is about the glamour of limelight from which age must fade as youth enters. The old comedian, Calvero, befriends Terry, a young dancer who has lost confidence in her talent. His friendship and encouragement enable her triumphantly to resume her career at the same time as his own is failing. Chaplin spent more than 2 years writing Limelight. As a preliminary, he wrote the story in the form of a full-length novel, 100,000 words long and entitled Footlights. The novel, never published or apparently even intended for publication, relates the story as it appears in the finished film, but in addition includes 2 separate biographies of Calvero and Terry, detailing their lives before the action of the film proper begins. What makes these biographies so remarkable is that we can trace in them a great deal of extended autobiography, as Chaplin quite openly introduces episodes from his own life and those of his parents. Just like Chaplin's own father, Calvero is devastated when he discovers his wife's infidelity and drifts into alcoholism. In the novel, Calvero even dies in the same hospital where Charles Chaplin Sr. died at the age of only 37. The character of Terry, the young dancer, was equally clearly based on Chaplin's mother, Hannah, although with reminiscences too of Chaplin's first and never-forgotten love, Hetty Kelly. Claire Bloom, who plays Terry, remembered that in rehearsing her, Chaplin was always recalling gestures of his mother or of Hetty and the clothes that they wore. With this strong underlay of nostalgia, Chaplin was at pains to evoke as accurately as possible the London he remembered from half a century before. In this he was helped by the great Russian-born designer Eugene Lurier, who remodelled a set on the Paramount lot to look like a Victorian London street. A permanent setting of a theatre at RKO Pathé Studios was decorated to look like the Empire Theatre, London's grandest music hall at the start of the 20th century. For the climactic scene he planned a ballet in which Claire Bloom, not a dancer herself, was doubled by Melissa Hayden, a star of the New York City Ballet. Since the coming of sound films, Chaplin had always composed his own music scores with the help of arrangers. Exceptionally, the music for the ballet, 25 minutes long, although it was reduced in the final film, had to be composed in advance. The Limelight theme was to remain one of Chaplin's best-loved compositions, and in 1972, 20 years after the film's first release, he and his musical collaborators Ray Rash and Larry Russell were awarded a belated Oscar for Best Original Dramatic Score. The beautiful 20-year-old English stage actress Claire Bloom was chosen to play Terry, and Chaplin's son Sidney was given the secondary male role. Perhaps it was a comfort in these difficult days, and an element of the nostalgia, to have his family around him. As well as Sidney, his son Charles played a comedy policeman in the ballet. Chaplin's own half-brother, Wheeler Dryden, is the other clown. Wheeler Dryden also played the Doctor, and Chaplin's new young family made their screen debuts, Geraldine, the eldest, Josephine, and Michael. Even his young wife Una doubled for Claire Bloom in 2 brief shots. Though Chaplin's public life was beset by problems, at least the shooting of Limelight was trouble-free and was completed in 55 shooting days, an exceptional standard of economy for Chaplin's feature productions. The premiere was, appropriately, held in London on the 16th of October 1952.
Visita mi canal.
In Chaplin's absence from America, open official hostility escalated to a point where he decided not to return to what he called that unhappy country. Thereafter, he made his permanent residence in Europe. At that moment, Chaplin believed that Limelight would be his last film. Happily, it was not. But if it had proved so, this exercise in nostalgia and family autobiography would have been a fitting conclusion to his creative life.
Well, make it 6 o'clock after rehearsal. And you, young lady, you run up to your dressing room before you get chilled. Where's Neville? Coming.
All right, Fred. Turn out those lights.
Back to Britain in the liner Queen Elizabeth comes Charlie Chaplin after an absence of 21 years. And this time he's brought his lovely young wife, Una, daughter of American playwright Eugene O'Neill, and their children. Geraldine is just 6 years old.
October 1952. Chaplin arrives in England for the premiere of Limelight. This is the second time back to his native country since he left it in 1912. It's at this moment that he learns he needs an immigration visa to return after being denounced by anti-communist groups. He has always been reproached for not wanting to become an American citizen, despite having worked in the United States for 40 years and making his fortune there.
When he left America a week ago, Charlie was worried in case our affection for him had dimmed. Londoners show him now that he need not have worried. We can never forget him or the laughter he brought into our lives.
Au milieu de l'enthousiasme de Londres, Charlie Chaplin a présenté son nouveau film à l'occasion d'un gala de bienfaisance. La princesse Margaret représentait la famille royale.
20,000 film fans crowd Leicester Square to bursting point for the Royal Command film performance.
Although outlawed from the United States, he was openly welcomed in Europe by artists and royal families alike. At the Comédie Française, he was invited to take Molière's seat. In Villefranche-sur-Mer, he met his old friend Jean Cocteau again, whom he had first met in 1936 on a cruise to Asia with Paulette Goddard. Wherever he went, Charlie Chaplin was hailed as the great creator he truly was.
Britain's film industry pays tribute to Charlie Chaplin at a luncheon organized by the Variety Club, which does such good work for British and American children.
My lords, gentlemen, barkers, kings, I hope nobody's left out. I think it's symbolic of the hands across the sea. America, the United States, wonderful country. And England, a grand, my country.
Shot in Hollywood after the Second World War, Limelight, the movie Charlie Chaplin went on to present in Europe, provided a chance to search for his lost time. He reconstructed in the studio the London he had left before the First World War. The premiere of the film in London 1952 allowed Chaplin to show his wife the London of his childhood. He would not rest until he had turned every stone to find it.
He was very poor his own youth. He was raised in enormous poverty, my father. And he'd go to London just to look at the old house he lived in with his mother. That was a sad little place. And he always felt, he couldn't help having feelings about his old country there. He'd walk the streets sometimes and look, well, I used to go here and there. Except that in that time it changed so much, it was difficult to say I grew up here.
Mi sono ricordato di come erano salate le lacrime ai 12-13 anni. Ho riprovato di nuovo questo sapore di sale della commozione davanti a Limelight. È un film con cui, rivedendolo molto di recente, io, ma credo un pochino tutti, ho un rapporto di sudditanza sentimentale.
Mrs. Allsop's out! Miss Allsop's out!
It was all an evocation of the melancholy and insular world of London that he remembered, and both loved and hated, of course, because he had, as you know, been in workhouse, he and his brother Sidney, as children. I mean, they'd been completely destitute. And when you go to that part of Kennington now, which is now being gentrified, even when I was young, it was pretty dreadful.
Headache?
Where am I?
You're in my room. I live 2 floors above you.
What happened?
Well, I came home this evening and smelled gas coming from your room, so I broke in the door, called a doctor, and together we brought you up here.
Why didn't you let me die?
It was a young English actress with a classical training, Claire Bloom, who was brought to Chaplin's attention.
The Honourable Lady of the House, which is she?
Speak to me, I shall answer for her.
On Chaplin's invitation, she was to come to New York to do a screen test.
He wanted me to bring a chaperone because he'd had quite enough trouble with young girls. So I came with my mother. When we arrived, very nervous about meeting Chaplin. You can imagine. He was at the airport to meet us. He was extremely beautiful. Wonderful white hair. He was very blue eyes. People always think he had dark eyes, but they weren't. These and beautiful, expressive hands. From that moment on, I was not frightened of him. And we worked every day, and then we went to costumier's, and that was where he said to me, wear this shawl. My mother wore a shawl like that. My mother wore a skirt like that. And I realized he was focusing, horrible word, he was remembering and incorporating into the character both his mother and Una, his wife, and I think all the lost young women of his childhood.
In contrast to the tramp who fell in love with young girls but was never loved in return, Calvero in Limelight, an older tramp, afforded himself the luxury of awakening in these girls the most tender of loves.
If you remember the scene where they walk along the embankment and she says, I love you, that's all that matters. I felt so strongly that this was his wish.
Us?
Yes. Us. You and me. Together.